In this video, you will have the opportunity to take a TOEFL reading practice test. You will see a passage and questions. After you finish the test, I will show you how to find the correct answers quickly. Now, grab some paper and a pen so you can write down your answers and compare them with the correct answers I will show you afterwards. If you're going to take your TOEFL soon, check out my TOEFL materials. There, I teach you everything you need to score high. I show you step by step how to give high-scoring answers. And of course, we do many practice tests together, so you will feel confident for your test. You can find the link to the TOEFL materials in the description box. And now, let's get started. By the way, if you want more TOEFL reading practice tests, hit the like button and write yes in the comments. If you want something else, tell me your video wish in the comments so I know what you would like to see on this channel. Now, let's continue solving this test. Let's take a look at question 1. Which of the following can be inferred from paragraph 1 about modern art? First, let's understand the main idea of the paragraph. It tells us that modern art, created between the 1860s and 1970s, is experimental, often abstract, and may not clearly represent objects or people. Unlike earlier art, which was more realistic, modern art is open to interpretation. So let's look at each option. A says, it lets the viewer interpret the meaning of a work of art. The passage says that modern art may be abstract and open to interpretation. That's your clue. If something is open to interpretation, it means viewers can look at the same piece and come up with different meanings. The artist isn't saying this is exactly what you should see. So yes, we can definitely infer that modern art allows the viewer to interpret the meaning of the work. So A is correct. Now, let's check out why the other answer choices are incorrect. B. It represents an image in a clearly defined way. This is wrong because the passage says the opposite. Modern art may not clearly represent landscapes, objects, or people. That's the whole point of this artistic movement. It challenges traditional clarity and realism. Let's move on to C. It reached its peak in the 20th century. This is also incorrect. While the paragraph tells us when modern art was created, between the 1860s and 1970s, it doesn't say anything about when or whether it reached its peak. That's the kind of detail we'd need extra context for, so we can't infer this just from the paragraph. And finally, D is wrong too. It says that modern art was a complete departure from realism, but the paragraph says modern art may be abstract, not always. So it's not fair to say all modern art completely abandoned realism. Some modern works might still be realistic. Here's a tip for inference questions. Always look for what the passage implies, even if it doesn't say it directly, but make sure your answer is still grounded in the actual text. Don't overreach. Let's check out question 2. According to paragraph 2, what happened during the modern era? First, let's understand the main idea of the paragraph. It talks about how the modern era brought big changes to the art world. Artists were no longer working mainly for wealthy patrons, which gave them more creative freedom. There was also a shift away from traditional norms. Artists started questioning the rules and expressing their inner thoughts instead of just creating realistic images. Plus, with advances in technology and industry, they had access to more materials, which led to a wave of artistic exploration. So let's look at each option. A says there was a loss of morals and values. This one's off. The paragraph doesn't mention anything about morals or values being lost. It talks about a breakdown of tradition and more freedom in expression, but that doesn't mean people lost their sense of right and wrong. So A is incorrect. B says artists began to question and rebel against feudalism. This also misses the mark. Yes, the passage does mention that artists were less tied to feudal systems. They were no longer being paid by rich and powerful people. But it never says artists were actively rebelling against feudalism. Instead, it just points out that the world had become less feudalist, giving artists more independence. So B isn't the right answer either. C says materials and resources became less costly to access. That might sound logical, but the paragraph doesn't say anything about cost. It just mentions that, thanks to advancements in technology and industry, artists had access to a wider range of materials. It's about variety, not price, so C is out. Now let's check D. More exploration in art was possible. This is the correct answer. The paragraph says, Advancements in technology and industry in the 20th century resulted in a larger range of materials for artists to experiment with. This resulted in new artistic creations and exploration unseen in earlier eras. So, with new materials and more freedom, artists could create works unlike anything seen in earlier eras. That's exactly what artistic exploration means: trying new things, pushing boundaries, and creating in ways that weren't possible before. So D is spot on. Let's move on to question 3. The word they in paragraph 3 refers to A. People, B. Artists, C. Objects, D. Light. First, let's get the context. The paragraph is discussing the transition from Impressionism to Post-Impressionism and then into Cubism. It explains how artists began thinking differently about how we see the world. In particular, Post-Impressionists believed that we don't actually see objects directly. Instead, we see the light that those objects reflect. Now, here's the key sentence. Post-Impressionist artists believe that, as people do not see objects but the light they reflect, artists should paint in natural light. So we're trying to figure out what they refers to in the light they reflect. Let's look at each option. A says, people. This doesn't work. The sentence says, people do not see objects but the light they reflect. So people are doing the seeing. They're not reflecting light. So A is incorrect. B, artists. Again, this doesn't make sense. Artists don't reflect light in this context. It's not about them shining or glowing. The sentence is explaining what artists believe, not what they reflect. So this one's also incorrect. C, objects. This looks great. The sentence sets up a contrast. People don't see the objects. They see the light the objects reflect. So they clearly refers back to objects, the things in the world that bounce light toward our eyes. This fits perfectly. So C is the correct answer. D says light. This one doesn't work grammatically. Light is singular, but they is a plural pronoun. Plus, light doesn't reflect light. That would be a weird loop. So D is out too. Here's a quick TOEFL tip for questions like this. Always look just before the word to find the noun that matches in both meaning and grammar. Check for singular versus plural and think about what actually makes sense in the sentence. We'll continue with question 4. In paragraph 3, why does the author refer to Van Gogh's Starry Night? First, let's understand the main idea of the paragraph. It's all about how modern art evolved, starting with Post-Impressionism and moving into Cubism. The paragraph explains that Post-Impressionist artists believed we don't actually see objects directly, but rather the light they reflect. That change in thinking led artists to paint in a way that reflected perception and feeling, not just physical reality. Then the paragraph gives an example, Van Gogh's Starry Night. So let's look at each option. A says, to give an example of a painting that clearly represents the night sky. This sounds reasonable at first, but it's not what the paragraph says. In fact, Starry Night isn't meant to be a realistic image. It's meant to show how Van Gogh perceived the night sky. The whole point is that it's not about clear or realistic representation. So A is incorrect. B, to provide an example of the change in art during the Post-Impressionist era. Yes, this is exactly right. The author is using Starry Night to show how art began to move away from realism and towards subjective perception, basically how the artist sees or feels about the world. This is a defining feature of Post-Impressionist art, and Van Gogh's painting is the perfect example. So B is correct. Now, let's see why the other answer choices are incorrect. C says, to give an example of a work of art that has influenced other paintings. Now, it's true that Starry Night is famous and probably did inspire other artists, but that's not the reason it's mentioned in this paragraph. The paragraph doesn't talk about influence. It talks about changes in artistic style. So C isn't supported by the text. D, to point out the first great masterpiece of modern art. This one is also incorrect. Starry Night is a famous painting, sure, but the paragraph doesn't call it the first great modern masterpiece. It's described as a post-impressionist work, which came before full-blown modern art like Cubism. So D is out. Here's a quick tip for these kinds of questions. When you're asked why an author refers to something, always go back to the sentence and read what's happening around it. What point is the author trying to make? Examples are there to support a bigger idea. So find that idea and you'll find your answer. We'll move on to question 5. The word depiction in paragraph 3 is closest in meaning to A, detail, B, presentation, C, painting, D, portrayal. First, let's look at the sentence from the paragraph where this word appears. It says, Chagall was another visionary of modern art, well known for his depiction of dreams through art. So we need to figure out what depiction means in this context. We're being told what Chagall is known for, specifically how he shows or represents dreams in his artwork. Let's go through the choices. A says detail. Now, detail refers to the small parts of something, like the fine elements in a painting. But depiction isn't about small parts. It's about the overall way something is shown or represented. So A doesn't fit. B, presentation. This is a bit closer, but it's still not quite right. Presentation can mean how something is introduced or laid out, but depiction has a stronger focus on representation, especially in visual or artistic form. So B isn't the best match either. C, painting. This sounds possible because we are talking about art, right? But the word painting refers to a specific medium, like a piece of art made with paint. In contrast, depiction is broader. It's about how something is shown, not the format or medium. So C is too narrow. D says portrayal. Yes, this is the best choice. Portrayal means the representation of something, especially in art or literature. In the sentence, his depiction of dreams means how Chagall represented or portrayed dreams in his artwork. So D is the correct answer. Here's a tip for vocabulary questions. Always try to swap the answer choices directly into the sentence and ask yourself, does this make sense here? It's like testing puzzle pieces. The right one will fit naturally. Let's take a look at question 6. According to paragraph 3, why are Picasso and Matisse important artists? First, let's understand the main idea of the paragraph. It traces the evolution of modern art, beginning with post-impressionism and moving into more abstract styles like Cubism. It introduces several artists who helped shape this shift, including Picasso, Matisse, and Chagall. When Picasso and Matisse are mentioned, the text highlights how they helped propel modern art forward with daring new vision. In other words, they brought fresh, innovative ideas that changed the direction of art. So let's break down the options. A says they were not afraid to introduce new bright colors in art. This is partially true, especially for Matisse, who is mentioned as someone who introduced bright and expressive colors. But this detail is not the main reason why Picasso and Matisse are considered important in the paragraph. The focus is on how they pushed modern art forward with new ideas, not just color. So A is not the best answer. B, they were the only artists to push the limits of modern art. This goes too far. The passage never says they were the only ones. In fact, other artists like Chagall are also mentioned as being visionary and influential. So this answer is inaccurate because it exaggerates the claim. B is incorrect. C says they were visionaries who greatly changed art. Yes, this is the correct answer. The text literally says that Matisse and Picasso helped propel modern art with daring new vision. That's another way of saying they were visionaries who made a big impact on the direction of modern art. So C is correct. D, they followed developments in psychology of that era. That's actually referring to Chagall, not Picasso or Matisse. The paragraph clearly says that Chagall followed developments in psychology and used that influence to explore dreams and the subconscious in his work. So D is also incorrect. Let's continue with question 7. The word startling in paragraph 4 is closest in meaning to A, crazy, B, surprising, C, strange, or D, lovely. First, let's look at the sentence in the passage. Surrealism played with the imagination and subconscious through startling images and strange placement of objects, as in Salvador Dali's The Persistence of Memory. So we're trying to figure out what startling means based on how it's used here. The sentence is describing how surrealist art grabs attention by using unexpected or unusual images and layouts. Let's go through the choices. A, crazy. This one might seem close at first, because surrealist art can definitely feel wild or bizarre. But crazy is a more emotional or even slang term. It doesn't quite match the tone of the passage. Startling means something that catches you off guard, not necessarily something that's out of control or irrational. So A is incorrect. We'll move on to B, surprising. Yes, this seems to be the best match. If something is startling, it surprises you. It makes you stop and go, whoa, I wasn't expecting that. In the sentence, surrealist art uses surprising, eye-catching images that challenge what we're used to seeing. That's exactly the point the author is making. So B is correct. Now, let's check out the other answer choices to ensure that they are incorrect. C, strange. This is actually already used in the sentence. It says strange placement of objects. So if the author had meant strange, they wouldn't need to say startling too. That tells us startling must mean something different from strange. So C isn't quite right. D, lovely. This one's way off. Lovely means beautiful or charming, and that's not the tone here at all. The focus is on how surrealist art surprises the viewer, not on whether it's pretty. So D is definitely not correct. Let's check out question 8. According to paragraph 5, all the following statements are true about modern art except, and then you can see the answer choices. Now, let's go through each option to find the one that is not true. A says, the focal point for art in the 1950s was the United States. This is true. The paragraph clearly says, the USA became the center for modern art in the 1950s and 60s. So A is not the correct answer to the question. We're looking for the one false statement. Let's check out B. Form took less precedence in the content of art. The paragraph says, art now focused on form rather than content. So form actually became more important, not less. That makes B the one false statement, so B is the correct answer. Now let's see why C and D are incorrect. C. Modern art now commented on society and culture. This is true. The passage gives Andy Warhol's Campbell's Soup painting as an example of how modern art commented on consumerism and celebrity culture. So C is accurate. D. There was a movement of art external to the traditional institution. The paragraph says, an interest in the exhibition of art outside of the museum setting also became important. So D is also true. Here's a quick TOEFL tip for except questions. Don't forget that you are looking for the one answer that does not match the passage. It's easy to slip into true statement mode, so stay alert for the one that doesn't fit. Let's have a look at question 9. Directions. Look at the part of the passage displayed below with the letters A, B, C, and D. Where would the following sentence best fit? Anti-art movements such as surrealism began after World War I, and there was exploration into the connections between art, design, music, and architecture. And then you can see the paragraph with the 4 possible insertion points. First, let's understand what the new sentence is about. It introduces surrealism as an anti-art movement that emerged after World War I and mentions its broad influence across different creative fields like art, design, music, and architecture. So we want to find a place where this sentence fits logically and smoothly into the paragraph. Let's try each option. Choice A. The first sentence says, in the 20th century, there were many modern art movements, including Expressionism, Art Nouveau, and Futurism. This sentence is a general introduction to several movements: Expressionism, Art Nouveau, Futurism. If we chose A, we'd be jumping straight into surrealism before the paragraph even sets the stage. That would feel out of place. So A is not the best fit. Let's continue reading. Surrealism played with the imagination and subconscious through startling images and strange placement of objects, as in Salvador Dali's The Persistence of Memory. As you can see, the sentence explains surrealism. If we insert the sentence where it says B, the sentence introduces surrealism by describing when it emerged after World War I and hints at its experimental nature. Then the paragraph immediately goes on to describe how surrealism worked, using imagination, the subconscious, and strange imagery, like in Dali's The Persistence of Memory. So the flow from general introduction to specific details is perfect here. So B is correct. Now let's check out why the other answer choices are incorrect. Choice C. This is after the paragraph has explained what surrealism is. It doesn't make sense to first explain what surrealism is and then introduce surrealism, so C is incorrect. Choice D doesn't make sense as well. This is after the paragraph starts discussing the spread of modern art to the United States. If we inserted the sentence here, it would interrupt the flow. The paragraph would be jumping back in time to talk about surrealism after moving on to a different topic. The sentence belongs before the details on surrealism, not after everything else. Here's a tip for organization questions in TOEFL reading. Pay close attention to the logical flow, general to specific or timeline order. You want the sentence to fit like a puzzle piece. If it feels awkward or out of sequence, it's probably not the right spot. Finally, we'll check out question 10. The question says, directions. An introductory sentence for a brief summary of the passage is provided below. Complete the summary by selecting the 3 answer choices that express the most important ideas in the passage. Some sentences do not belong in the summary because they express ideas that are not presented in the passage or are minor ideas in the passage. This question is worth 2 points. Here's the introductory sentence. The modern art era emerged during times of great change and was characterized by innovation, bravery, and ingenuity. Now, let's go through the answer choices one by one to find the 3 main ideas that best complete this summary. A says, modernism was a driver in the development of modern art. This is a key point from the passage. Paragraph 2 specifically says, modernism has an important connection with the development of modern art, and it explains how this led to more freedom, individual expression, and a breakdown of traditional norms. That's a big idea, and it supports the summary's theme of change and innovation. So A is correct. Let's check out B. There are a variety of movements within the genre of modern art. The passage spends most of its time talking about different movements: post-impressionism, cubism, surrealism, pop art, minimalism, and more. Each movement contributed something new and reflected different aspects of innovation and change. So B is also a main idea and correct. C says Warhol's Campbell Soup is a famous painting which comments on commercialism. This is true, but it's way too specific. It's a supporting detail used to show how modern art made cultural commentary, but it's not a main idea on its own. We wouldn't include this kind of example in a summary, so C is incorrect. What about D? D says Modern art is marked by change and broad creative scope. This matches the passage and the summary sentence perfectly. The text emphasizes how modern art evolved, challenged traditions, and expanded into new forms and styles, from painting to performance to digital art. So D is definitely a main idea and correct. Now, let's see whether we can rule out E. The 20th century saw the emergence of postmodernism. This is a detail within the text which is not a main idea. Consequently, E is incorrect. So the three correct answers are A, B, and D. Here's a tip for summary questions in TOEFL reading. When answering summary questions, focus on the big picture. Main ideas should cover entire paragraphs or recurring themes, not small examples or side notes. I hope you liked this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon so you're notified when the next video comes out. Also, share this video with your friends so they can improve their TOEFL score too. See you in the next video.